Welcome to the Teachers to Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dean. This is the podcast where we tell you how you can grow your tech skills, whether you're starting from scratch or just want to go farther. You might be thinking about a new job, a whole new career, or just a new hobby. We'll have something for everyone, so keep listening. Welcome to this episode of Teachers to Tech. Today I'm going to hope to untangle something for you that kind of comes across my mind every time I try to straighten up my electronic stash in the basement. And that is, why do we need all these different cables? Well, I'm going to help you kind of decode some of the things that cables do and why they have changed. And my hope is that it'll make a little bit more sense for, number one, so that you have a little bit more patience when you're looking at 3 or 4 different kinds of cables and wondering why. And when you're having to untangle them all and you're tempted, well, maybe I'll just throw these out. Or maybe you say, I need to get these organized. Hopefully, the way I organize this podcast will give you a little bit of a scheme to decide, I can break these up by category, and maybe I know now which ones I will need less of in the future, and those can be tucked away somewhere out of sight unless something special comes up. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start with several reasons why we have different cables just in general. The first reason is specialization. We are going to have different kinds of cables with different capabilities, and therefore we are going to have different form factors. Maybe different connectors will be required, but it's because they're doing different jobs. Second, we are going to have different cables because of innovation. We are going to improve our technology, and that may include different connectors to be required or different cables to be required, maybe carrying more conductors than in the past. Maybe they're smaller. Maybe they're faster, and I can explain that when we get to data cables. It's just a wire. How can it be faster? A little more to it than that, but we'll talk about that when the time comes. And then the third reason that we might have different cables is profit. And I'm sure you can think of the same company I'm thinking of when you say, wait a minute, all of their cables are different from everybody else's. Why is that? Well, kind of proprietary. If I make it and I'm the only one that makes it and I make it work a certain way, guess what? You buy my product, you have to buy all the compatible products. We've seen this before, right? Okay, so let's break it down by different types of cable first. We'll start with data cables first. You might remember, if you're old enough, that it used to be you'd have these bulky cables that would be part of your connection to peripherals on your computer. They would have real big ends, and in some cases, those ends would have screws that you would drive into the connector on the device so that the cable end would not come out. And those did the job, but they did the job at a slower data transfer rate. They couldn't do something that our newest USB cords can do, which is to carry power to a device. And frankly, they were bulky. So we replaced those cables, called serial cables, with USB cables. Now, at first, these had kind of large ends. And if you've got a USB printer, I do have one for my small business downstairs. It's a label printer. You'll find a regular USB end at the end of the cable that goes into the laptop. And at the other end, there's kind of a square connector that goes into the printer. And there is a larger connection there than you would see in a lot of other devices. You probably have a cable that has a USB connection at one end to charge a device at home. Maybe it's your phone, maybe it's something else. And you'll notice that that other end that goes into that device is typically smaller. But we still have the bigger size around for printers. Now, when USB came out and those smaller ends started evolving, we had different sizes and different form factors of those smaller ones. And you might have had USB-A or USB-B type connectors or micro USB that showed up in older phones. But then the USB-C is the latest one, and you're seeing that show up everywhere. It could even be that your laptop charger plugs into your laptop with a USB-C connection, and you may have more than one USB-C port on your laptop. That's because we're moving into that. One of the advantages there is that they are faster data transfer And that means faster than other USB types, and that is faster than the serial type. So we're working with innovation here, right? We're speeding up. But the other thing that we can do is carry power over there. And as I just said, some laptops now have a USB-C connection for their power from their brick. And you may have devices already that need a USB-C connection to charge. I know that I do. And so we see the innovation there. And there have been some different versions of the USB connection ends depending on who makes what device, but it's kind of getting standardized around USB-C. So those are some examples of data cables and why they evolve and how, and why there are some advantages rather than having us just freeze in time and say, I've got this, it works good enough, let's stop with this. Oh, and I didn't mention one of the big things with USB-C, it can carry video signal. So that's a pretty big innovation, and that's important to a lot of us, I'm sure. So that kind of hopefully reconciles you to changing over cables. We're kind of forced into it anyway, but we are getting something in return. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about cables that are used for media. All right, next up, I want to talk to you a little bit about the cables that are used for media. Now, these are pretty easy to deal with because we tend to make a big jump from one type to another, and it's a very obvious looking thing. So if you're old enough to remember having a VCR, you probably remember the AV cables that came with it, and they came with other things too, like stereo. And at the ends of those were connectors called RCA or phono connectors. And the way those worked was they had an outer kind of a shell shape that was one conductor, and then a center post that came out farther than the shell shape. That was the center conductor that carried the signal. And that's what you had. And all you had to do was remember at your TV that, there was a certain color that you plugged in that had the video signal, and you better plug the same end color in to your VCR to carry the video into the video jack of the TV. And then the other two were your left and right. If you had stereo, or way back when you didn't even have stereo, you would have just one more cable with the same end but a different color plastic shell over it. So you could say, all right, I plugged in, say, the yellow to the video, so now I'm going to plug the white into the audio to go into the TV audio. If you were a little more slick, you might have that cable split off so that your video went into the TV, but your audio left and right would go into, say, a stereo, and you had some stereo sound. Later, that evolved a little bit into some surround sound. But the big jump there was to the HDMI cable. And that's a high-definition cable, high-definition media interface, and that did all kinds of things for us. Now, one of the things that it did was get us higher resolution. Another thing that it does is it will consolidate, right? So that HDMI cable is one cable. You get your audio and your video there. You're also able to do a little bit of daisy chaining. So, for instance, I have an HDMI cable that runs into my sound, but it comes out of my TV. And so whatever I have on the TV is going to come out of my sound system, my sound bar, my surround, my subwoofers, but it doesn't have to be any specific item. So I have a Blu-ray player that uses HDMI, and that plays into the TV, but I could switch over to my TV antenna, and I would still have that sound coming out of the TV in. That all is pretty simple. Well, Dean, is all the TV sound just going through? Yes, but when I want to work the sound system volume, I just use the TV remote because it uses another setup called a CEC that shares signals and makes it possible for me to use one control, which we all could use less remote controls if possible, right? And so that's one way that this can happen. Now, just before we leave this topic, I want to first of all recommend you might want to keep a couple of those RCA cables around just in case you come across that relative that says, I got this old camcorder and it made VHS tapes or VHS-C, the small tapes, and I'd really like to get them on some other format. Well, you're going to need those kinds of cables to play back with whatever you do. There are converter boxes that will let you capture those things and record them. So you might hang on to one or two of those cables, but probably in a back drawer somewhere. And then there is a specialized kind of cable I wanted to mention. It's strictly audio typically, but it is an optical cable. It literally carries sound over a light beam on the cable, and that can be used for some real high fidelity type situations, but you won't see that a lot now. It kind of came in as we were switching toward HDMI, but HDMI does so much for us that it has mostly been eclipsed in consumer electronics. So that's audio. The next one I want to tackle in a minute here will be data cables. All right, I just want to take a minute or two to wrap up talking about cables by talking about data cables. Now, these are not necessarily the cables you see as often. You may decide that you want to have your computer connected directly to your internet router at home and use a LAN cable for that. A lot of LAN connections are happening in networks, so maybe in a work situation, you'd have more of a chance to see these. But some of them are in infrastructure. So for instance, in my house, I've got a cable that goes from my router into the wall, and then through the wall, I'm running a Cat6 Ethernet cable up to the loft in my house so that I can have a signal sent directly into my computer. I don't have to use Wi-Fi. So if I have a weak router or I want a little extra security, I can plug in instead of use Wi-Fi, and that Cat6 cable is a specific type of data cable. Now, this is another case where we repeatedly get new cables, but in this case, they tend to look the same. If you've seen older phone cables, some of you are very familiar and some of you aren't, you'll know that they were kind of a square or rectangular plug that you could push in and into your phone, into your fax machine, into a phone jack on the wall, and they kind of clip in with a little piece of plastic that would spring in. They're just smaller than the ends of local area network type cables, LAN cables, but these things are bigger. Well, if you look close, you'll see typically those connections are clear. You'll see a whole set of wires in there. Well, in producing different cat level cables, so the jump that I'm used to, because we made it building this house, we moved into Cat6 cables from Cat5, and one of the things that happened was the arrangements of the wires inside the cabling changed. And the reason it did that was by putting certain wires farther away from others, it restricted some of the interference that could happen. See, in wires, there's something that is called induction that can cause interference. And how this works, if you'll refer back to the episode we did, How to Speak Electron, I go into this a little bit more. But when you've got current flowing through a wire, it's going to give off some magnetic field. And that magnetic field, of course, can affect the wires that are near it. And so you can have interference between lines. Well, when that happens, it can cause faults in data transmission. And that, in turn, can slow our connections down. Well, how does that slow down? Well, when you're working with data and computers, the computers are looking for errors in packets that are sent of data, and it can ask for those to be resent. Well, all of that takes more time than if you just get a good clean signal. So that's one way that we innovate with cables to make them a little bit more reliable, a little faster, whatever it is. Another thing that I want to mention, just tying in here, that I didn't mention anywhere else. Why do we have so many different kinds of cables? And I said because of specialties. You'll find some cables, like the cables that bring cable TV into your house or bring data into that router in your house, they will be shielded. And some audio cables, same thing, meaning the inner conductor is a wire, and it might be strands of wire woven together, or it might be just a single solid wire, but it is surrounded by an insulator, and then outside of that insulator will be copper braid all the way around, almost as if you made cloth out of copper, and then the insulation. And the reason for that is that all of that braiding that surrounds that cable is connected to the ground. It's not the signal, it's the return or the ground. And that way, if that induction happens, if I happen to, say, set my cable that has that shielding around it next to a power cable in my house, I'm not going to get so much induction. I'm not going to interfere with the signal. And so that's a kind of protection to have that braid around. That also reminds me that I did not mention one other type of cable, but they're a little more obvious, and that is power cables. So if you were to look at my box of cables in the basement, yeah, it's a little bit messy, but I have separated the cables into different plastic bags inside the box in the way I've described to you. Just to wrap up, I've got the data cables all put together into one bag. I've got the media cables that are not HDMI in another bag. So all those different variations of just a single connector for sound, or one that has 3 different connectors for audio and video, etc., they're all in one bag. First of all, because I can tie that bag up, it's probably not going to get opened again very often at all. The HDMI cables that I have are spares. At some point, I'll probably need them for something, so they are kind of on their own. Data cables like USB-C, etc., they are all together. And then tucked in there are kind of related cables. Remember, I said that one reason we have different kinds of cables is for profit. And you know the manufacturer I'm talking about, their phones and their other items all have their own special connectors, and they'll say, well, it's so we can make our stuff work the best way possible. And while that's partly true, it's also true that now if I buy your phone, I have to buy your earphones. Well, I don't. I buy adapters, but originally I bought the adapters from that company too. Those will all get tossed in because they're all just data cables. They're spares, but they stay near the top because at some point I'm going to need those, sometimes because they work as charging cables too, right? Some of the USB cables. And then there are other power cords, like just power cords that come off a device that plug into the wall. I keep a couple of those spare, but those are separated out. And finally, a few of the old wall warts that I have might still work with other stuff. So they're in a bag too that just says, hey, these are power supplies. Once in a while, a power supply for one device will work with another. Frankly, probably not worth keeping them all unless you're an electronics guy like me. Those can be replaced, and frankly, you probably have that sitting around because the device that it went to died. If you're not going to replace the device, why do you still need that wall wart? So that's probably a good candidate to be donated or tossed. All right, I hope this helps you understand them. I hope this helps you manage them. Cables can be a little overwhelming, but if you know how to prioritize which ones you're likely to use and what you get by having these newer cables, you can be a lot less frustrated. Listen, all right, as always, I want to thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. If you haven't reviewed me yet, please do that on your favorite platform, and we'll look for you again real soon. Thanks. That's all we have for today. This is Dean saying thanks for listening, and we hope to have you back with us next time on Teachers to Tech.